Thank you for joining our online community. Through today's message, it's our desire that you will experience the presence, power, and plan of God for your life. If you have been blessed by our online resources, you can choose to be a blessing to many more souls by giving to our online campus. You can visit our website at crossroadscn.com, navigate to the More tab, then click on Online Giving. Thank you for your generosity and enjoy today's message.
It's great to be with you all this morning. I'm excited to share with you in these next few moments. I have to say, first of all, that I have a love-hate relationship with the morning routine. Any of the rest of you with me? I love when it's all done. I've loved when I've showered and I've gotten ready and painted the barn. I've loved the finished product, right? When it allows me to feel as though I can go somewhere and I can conquer the world and I can do something significant with my life. However, I will stall it as long as possible so as to avoid entering the battle that I face in my mind over the unwanted blemishes on my face, the added strands of gray I hope to hide, and the hunt for just the right outfit in my closet. So this morning, I am personally illustrating right here with this hairdo that I have boycotted the morning routine of blowing out my hair, curling it, and making it look like it should on a morning when I'm supposed to speak. Okay, so bear with me if you can get beyond the distraction of the nest on top of my head. We are going to move forward and we are going to talk about some really significant things here this morning, okay? So ladies, let me just say this, that you are marvelously and wonderfully made no matter what your hair looks like this morning, okay? So even, it's interesting, on Mother's Day, I find myself waking up in the morning and I just begin to pray, God, just give those moms a really great hair day today. If anything, just let them wake up this morning and just feel like they just look more beautiful than they ever have any other morning. Because we need that, right? We need that as moms. So there's a lot of pressure out there for us women, whether we're single, whether we're married, whether we're mothers or we're daughters. But I believe this message this morning will encourage us to step into a place of freedom and hope as we walk in the individuality of who we are. We are ordinary women called to do extraordinary tasks. With all the pressures out there to do and to be something other than who we are, this morning we're going to embrace the messy hair and we're going to encourage our hearts. All right? So men, bear with us. It is my prayer this morning that you will gain a sense of confidence today as you seek to envelop the women in your lives with an assurance of their worth and their God-designed call. So we're going to pray a passage this morning. See, that's how I feel. Isn't that great? That's exactly how I feel some mornings. Yes, barely yawning and waking it up, and I don't drink coffee. So you can go ahead and start praying for me because there's none of that in my system this morning. So anyway, here we go. We are going to pray this passage, and they're going to put it up on the screen with us this morning. And so let's pray this verse together as we move into what God has for us today. Hebrews 10:24 says, discover creative ways to encourage others and to motivate them toward acts of compassion, doing beautiful works as expressions of love. Father, this is our prayer this morning. God, that we will do creative things so that we might encourage one another, that we might build each other up. This is tough. Life is hard, and it feels difficult some days. And God, we need your help to be creative so that we can build our sisters and our brothers up in their faith, and that we can encourage them to be exactly who you have called and destined them to be. Open our hearts this morning to hear from you. God, we want to know exactly what it is that you're speaking to us because you have a very personal and specific word for each and every one of us that are sitting in this room today. God, bring in hope, bring in life, usher us to a new place of intimacy in our relationship with you today. We need you, Jesus, in your strong and very capable name. Amen. Amen. You know, as I sat at my kitchen table praying for wisdom and discernment as to where this message needed to go today, I was reminded about how monotonous and how ordinary my days as a mom feel, or have even been. There have been days where my dreams have blown up in the face of my daily routine and often leave me feeling quite a bit less than. It's in those moments where I encourage myself with a story about two women in the Bible who often go overlooked, yet have cheered me on toward righteous confidence and acts of compassion in the midst of my ordinary days. And I believe that they're going to do something for you today. These women have become my friends. They're sisters gathered around the table with me in the morning when I feel like I just need a dose of cheer. There are these women that I turn to sometimes and I just read their story over and over again, and I'll read it out loud because I know that they feel me. I know they're with me. And so, read with me. This is going to be a bit of a long passage, but we're going to walk through this story together. And so read with me as it's going to show up on the screen. It's found in Exodus 1, 8 through 21. And I'm reading from the New Living Translation. So eventually, a new king came to power in Egypt who knew nothing about Joseph or what he had done. He said to his people, "Look, the people of Israel now outnumber us and are stronger than we are. We must make a plan to keep them from growing even more. If we don't, and if war breaks out, they will join our enemies and fight against us. Then they will escape from the country." So the Egyptians made the Israelites their slaves. They appointed brutal slave drivers over them, hoping to wear them down with crushing labor. They forced them to build the cities of Pithom and Ramses as supply centers for the king. But the more the Egyptians oppressed them, the more the Israelites multiplied and spread, and the more alarmed the Egyptians became. So the Egyptians worked the people of Israel without mercy. They made their lives bitter, forcing them to mix mortar and make bricks and do all the work in the fields. They were ruthless in all of their demands. Then Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, gave this order to the Hebrew midwives, Shiphrah and Puah. "When you help the Hebrew women as they give birth, watch as they deliver. If the baby is a boy, kill him. If it is a girl, let her live." But because the midwives feared God, they refused to obey the king's orders. They allowed the boys to live too. So the king of Egypt called in the midwives. "Why have you done this?" he demanded. "Why have you allowed the boys to live?" "Well, the Hebrew women are not like the Egyptian women," the midwives replied. "They're more vigorous, and they have their babies so quickly that we cannot get there in time." So God was good to the midwives, and the Israelites continued to multiply, growing more and more powerful. And because the midwives feared God, he gave them families of their own. Then Pharaoh gave this order to all of his people: "Throw every newborn Hebrew boy into the Nile River, but you may let the girls live." So in the midst of this harsh treatment and abuse, these two women rise up out of the darkness to use their influence and ultimately bring about one of the greatest deliverances the world has ever known. Influence is powerful, and every single one of us have it. I've watched the influence of a 6-year-old bring down towering giants of men, right? I mean, we all know those 6-year-olds. We know them well. They have great influence. So in these next few moments, we're going to harness our influence and we're going to steer it in the direction of God's purposes. So drawing encouragement from Shiphrah and Puah, we're going to talk about how we can use our influence for change. The first one is this: Shiphrah and Puah used their ordinary to open doors of opportunity. They used their ordinary to open doors of opportunity. They were doulas, Old Testament midwives. Their job in the marketplace was not one of tremendous eloquence or esteem, but rather one who fulfilled an everyday common task of helping other women go through the pains of childbirth. These women came alongside women when they were most vulnerable, when they were angry, when they were frustrated, when they were tired, when they were exhausted, when they were at their absolute wits' end. These women would come alongside of them and they would support them. They would offer a voice of encouragement, a voice of calm, a voice of peace, a voice of strength, of confidence. They were called upon in the middle of the night, during their meal times, or just after they had fallen asleep. These women are heroes, really, in the midst of this ordinary life. But, however, these two women were brought to the attention of Pharaoh by name. They were Semitic women. They had probably helped Hebrew women as well as Egyptian women, and so they had a bit of a reputation, apparently, because Pharaoh knows them, or he knows of them, and so he calls for them. And it was at that particular moment that causes me to realize, what was it about these two that really set them apart? Because their job wasn't fantastic. Their job wasn't notable or honorable. So what was it that set them apart? Well, let me just say, about 18 months ago, I had a hysterectomy, and I find myself in a very short stay in the hospital. Well, it was during this stay where my stay was earmarked by two very different nursing experiences. I had one nurse that would come into the room and she would just light up the room. She was calm, she was peaceful, she was engaging. She would always bring me extra of what I didn't ask for. Extra juices, extra warming blankets, which, by the way, men, if you're looking for a good Mother's Day gift for your wives, that warming blanket machine thing, you need to get one of those for her. Like, right, women? Would that not just be awesome to have in our bedroom, like right next to our bed to just pull out and just use? Yeah, or next to the couch, whatever it is. Anyway, so I derail. But this experience with this one nurse was amazing. I just thought, she loves her job and she does it well. Then when her shift would end, I kind of had like this little bit of a dread. Like, okay, I'm getting the angry nurse now. So the angry nurse would come, and obviously there was something that happened that had caused her to resent her job. So she would come in and she felt absolutely irritated at the fact that I was even laying there. She felt irritated that I would make a request. And I came to the conclusion that she didn't care for her job, that she would rather be somewhere else. Well, there is an opportunity for us as women. If we are going to use our ordinary, we need to open doors of opportunity for us. And the way that we need to do that is to, first of all, be excellent at our ordinary. This one woman who was my first nurse, she was excellent at ordinary. She came in and she just encouraged me. She was asking questions about our family. She was engaging. Well, there's another woman that really stands out to me when I think about somebody who is excellent at ordinary. Barely 5 feet tall, this small woman who lived to be 91 years old suffered migraines, seizures, narcoleptic episodes for most of her life, and as a result of a head injury inflicted by an enslaver when she was an adolescent, she could barely read or write. Born into the most primitive, racist, sexist, and brutal periods in the United States history, yet she would become one of the world's leading abolitionists, a noted humanitarian, and an armed scout and spy for the United States Army during the American Civil War. Was she trained to be amazing? Was she given great circumstances for her greatness? Was she handed resources and financial assistance to help her? No. She simply looked for an open door for opportunity. She carried that into the midst of her ordinary and extremely less than ordinary circumstances, and she chose to be excellent and do the right thing. Harriet Tubman led her own family members and other enslaved people from the plantation system to freedom via the ingenious existing secret network of safe houses deemed the Underground Railroad. When you think about her life, her circumstances, and the situation that she came out of, it was less than ordinary. It was less than normal. But yet she looked for this open door of opportunity and she took advantage of it. Colossians 3:23 through 25 says, servants, do what you're told by your earthly masters, and don't just do the minimum that will get you by. Do your best. Work from the heart of your real master, for God, confident that you'll get paid in full when you come into your inheritance. Keep in mind always that the ultimate master you're serving is Christ. The sullen servant who does shoddy work will be held responsible. Being a follower of Jesus does not cover up bad work. Isn't that profound? As followers of Jesus, we need to love our ordinary. We need to be excellent at it. We need to stand out and be separate. So, what does your ordinary look like? What is your everyday daily routine? What does that look like? Do you stay home? Do you drive to a job? Is it routine or is it unpredictable? Whatever your days look like, be the champion of that day. In your work or in your attitude, your family, your coworkers, your children, they're all watching. Let's do it all for Jesus. So not only are we going to be excellent at our ordinary, the next thing is we're going to refuse to focus on our limitations. Okay, let me just tell you. My weaknesses are always staring at me in the face. They're highlighted, they're bolded, they're italicized. I can rattle them off without thinking. It's in the dark moments of my soul when I dwell on them and they paralyze me from accomplishing everything that God has set before me, even on those just plain old ordinary days. Shiphrah and Puah, you know what? They were matriarchs in this patriarchal society. They may or may not have known how to read or write. These women grew up in a culture where education was reserved for the wealthy, influence was given to the men, and position within the community was enslavement. There weren't many career opportunities or fields or paths for them to choose from. Yet these ladies understood their weaknesses, yet focused on the opportunity that lied before them instead. Hebrews 12, 1 through 3, from the Message, said this so beautifully. Do you see what this means? All these pioneers who blazed the way, all these veterans cheering us on, it means we better get on with it. Strip down, start running and never quit. No extra spiritual fat, no parasitic sins. Keep your eyes on Jesus, who both began and finished this race that we're in. Study how he did it, because he never lost sight of where he was headed, that exhilarating finish in and with God. He could put up with anything along the way, cross, shame, whatever. And now he's there, in the place of honor, right alongside God. So when you find yourselves flagging in your faith, go over that story again, item by item, that long litany of hostility he plowed through. Well, that will shoot adrenaline through your veins, through your souls. Isn't that great? I love how that's stated. So how do we refuse to focus on our limitations? What does that look like? First of all, let's change our narrative. Ladies, men, we all have a story that we play over and over again in our minds, don't we? Like we rehearse it, like we've memorized it. We know it inside and out, that narrative of who we are and who we aren't. That story of you're not good enough, or you know what, who do you think you are saying that? Or who do you think you are doing that? Or what do you think that you're going to be successful at that? We have this story, so let's change our narrative. What perspective dialogue needs to be altered in your life? So this week, I just have a challenge for you. Make an appointment with a good friend and just ask them the question, what are you doing to overcome? How have you overcame? And here's what I would like to do to overcome. Here's what I'd like to do to just band with this, with you, with my accountability partner, and let's seek ways that we can overcome. Challenge each other's narrative. Push one another to think beyond your weaknesses. Paul describes in 2 Corinthians 12, 9 through 10, again in the Message, he says, because of the extravagance of those revelations, and so I wouldn't get a big head, I was given the gift of a handicap to keep me in consistent touch with my limitations. Satan's angel did his best to get me down. What he in fact did, though, was push me to my knees. No danger, then, of walking around high and mighty. At first, I didn't think of this as a gift, and I begged God to remove it. 3 times I did that, and then he told me, my grace is enough. It's all you need. My strength comes into its own in your weaknesses. Once I heard that, I was glad to let it happen. I quit focusing on the handicap and began appreciating the gift. It was a case of Christ's strength moving in on my weaknesses. Now I take limitations in stride, and with good cheer, these limitations that cut me down to size, abuse, accidents, opposition, bad breaks, I just let Christ take over. And so the weaker I get, the stronger I become. So let's change our story. Let's focus on the right things. And how do we do that? We're not only changing our story that we're telling ourselves, changing our narrative, but next, we're appreciating our weaknesses. Now, that sounds a little crazy and kind of Pollyannish, maybe, but let's talk about this for just a minute. I have a very deep love for yummy food. I don't know, the rest of you guys have really great plans for lunch today? You've been thinking about it, moms? Okay, so I have to just confess that my favorite all-time food is pizza. Thank you, yes. Yep, all-time favorite food, and I love a really good Chicago deep dish. Okay, so let me just say this. The older that I get, the harder I have to work out, and the less of those yummy foods I'm able to eat. I'm getting back to the pizza, so bear with me. Okay, I could eat them. However, I'm really not comfortable with myself when I do. So now lately, after a 12-day detox and eliminating all sugar and grains from my diet, I'm gaining a deeper appreciation for healthy foods. As I eat at a restaurant, which happened just recently, I'm eating at this restaurant with my family, and I am watching them indulge in these buttery, hot, warm rolls. And they're lathering them with cinnamon sugar butter. And I'm thinking, how dare you? Right in front of me, I'm just finishing up this 12-day detox and cleanse, and you are really pushing it. So I'm watching them, and I'm staring down at this bowl of fresh steamed veggies, back at their buttery bread, my fresh steamed veggies, and I'm thinking, oh, you got to be kidding me. But yet, I'm looking at them, and I'm thinking, you know what? 12 days ago, I would have just said, forget it, I'm eating the roll. But now I have this new love for health food. This new love for these fresh steamed veggies. And my dependence, my weakness with food is driving me towards healthier choices and ultimately a life less dependent on food and more dependent on Jesus. Who knows, I may be saving my own life, right? Okay, so getting back to the pizza. So Chris comes to me and he says, so Nicki, what do you want to do for Mother's Day? You're eating paleo now, and are you gonna eat some, are you gonna splurge? Are you gonna eat something different today? And I was thinking, oh man, I really got to think about this because, once you kind of go off, it's hard to get back on track. And so anyway, I thought, okay, I think I can do this because I'm determined to hit this goal that I have. So anyway, I made the splurge today that I am going to eat a Giordano's slice of deep dish pizza for Mother's Day today, right? No shame here, no judgment from those of you who are sticking to strict healthy diets. But Monday tomorrow, you can believe me, I will be back eating those steamed veggies. All right, so today we are going to have Giordano's deep dish pizza, and I cannot wait. However, this is going somewhere, so bear with me. You guys can clap at that, yeah, because this is a really great thing, right? We're eating pizza for lunch. Okay, so appreciating our weaknesses, however, allows us to laugh at ourselves and not take these limitations so seriously. God gave these weaknesses to us to draw us closer to himself. So the second way that we can influence for change, we've got our first way where we're looking for opportunities in our ordinary. Now, the second way that we can influence is to seek God's approval versus others. Shiphrah and Puah, they feared God. They had an enduring reverence for him that surpassed what could have been a death sentence for them. Proverbs 16:6 states, through love and faithfulness, sin is atoned for. Through the fear of the Lord, a man avoids evil. The fear of God in me is challenged in new ways as we have greater access to social media outlets. The urge to compare ourselves with others come at lightning speed as we scroll through the news feed on Facebook, or we're looking at all the pictures of what other people have or don't have on Instagram. We compare our behind-the-scene, ugly, ordinary, everyday mess to the highlight reels of everybody who's placing them before us. Others' accomplishment photos and exotic destination experiences remind us of our ordinary, our inadequacies, and our lack. One of the keys to fearing God and avoiding evil, to seeking God's approval over others, is to shake off comparison. Let's shake it off. Removing the temptation to live out someone else's calling or life, it allows us to know who God is in our calling, to know who God is in our lives. It frees us up to stand in awe of Him and how He chooses to work through our gifts and through our weaknesses. I was 30 years old in 2002 when I gave birth to our first child, Brayden. Prior to having her, I had worked in various different areas, various different fields. As an orthodontic assistant, I was a youth and associate pastor at a couple different churches, and then a director of development and an executive assistant to a CEO of a nationwide nonprofit organization. I tell you this only to say or illustrate that while I was pregnant, Chris and I decided that I would stay home and that I would raise our kids so that I could be a constant parental presence in their lives, training them and teaching them the way that they needed to go. I'll tell you, at first I was so eager about this. I could not wait till my last day of work. I could not wait to be home and not be summoned by a morning alarm clock. Or I could just wait. I couldn't wait to get out with my stroller and push it around the neighborhood with my good close friends and just talk and share and encourage each other and have the rest of the day to just kick back and love holding my babies. Well, then I was kind of caught into the alarm of sleepless nights and crying kids that I couldn't seem to console. And then Christine Kane, do you all know who she is? This sweet, amazing humanitarian who decides to just stick a wrench in the sex trafficking industry. She got my attention. And I am reading about the things that this powerful woman is doing, and I am feeling a bit less than. In my snotty shirts and my messy hair and my yoga pants that I barely got out of, many days Chris would arrive home at, 5:30 that night, and he would look at me and I'd be wearing the exact same thing he said goodbye to me in that morning when he left for work. So here I am looking at Christine Kane, and I had no idea how this vigilant, beautiful humanitarian would cause me to come to grips with the intrinsic yet insecure idea that I should be doing way more than just raising my 3 kids. Nothing robs our fear of God more than when we line ourselves up against another person, and for whatever reason that might be. Hungering for who God has called and created us to be comes out of quiet moments of wrestling with who we are and who we aren't. It comes in those moments where we wrestle with God. They're painful, but oh so necessary. So, in addition to shaking off comparison, because that's a big one, ladies. We really struggle with that. We look at all these images on social media and we just think, how do they do that? Every single post that they post just seems like they're getting an Oscar for something, or they're, how does that happen? So let's shake it off. When we're vulnerable, this is our next point, when we're vulnerable, we need to redirect our gaze. When we're feeling a bit insecure, we're feeling less than, this is when we refocus. Redirecting our gaze. Time spent in the presence of Jesus reminds me of the convictions that God has given to me, not to Sally or Susie or anyone else that's in our lives, But time spent in Jesus' presence reminds me that those convictions to pay down debt, to minimize social media involvement, to reduce the activities that my kids are involved in, to prioritize our possessions, to monitor what we watch, read, and listen to, and live very different in a culture that baits me to conform. It may have been a temptation for Shiphrah and Puah to ask, what will Pharaoh and his officials think of us if we do this? Or what will happen to us if we do this? Yet, what ultimately won out here was what God would think of them. And that's what I want to be confronted with every single day I wake up. I want to think, God, I want to make you smile today. God, I want to please you today. I don't want to look like Christine Kane. I don't want to look like anybody else. I want to be who you have called me to be. Because that is what's going to be extraordinary. Hebrews 12:2 says, let us look only to Jesus, the one who began our faith and who makes it perfect. It's important for me to maintain a constant gaze on Jesus. When the noise around me urges me to look elsewhere, or I become anxious, it's in those moments that I become anxious. It's in those moments that I start to fret, that I become angry at myself for not being like someone else or doing the things that other people are doing. This is not the life that God has called me to or asked of me, neither of you. So as I return my eyes to Jesus, the last word that he speaks to me, that's what I focus on. And then that gentle peace and that calm begin to flood my soul. So here's our assignment for this one. Let's make a list of the activities or the events that surface the insecurity, the doubt in our lives, and that reroute us in our attention from Jesus. Make a list of those things. Those things that hijack your peace. We know what they are, right? We know exactly what hijacks our peace. You know what they are. Let's just decide. How many of you remember or have watched the movie What About Bob? Anyone? Okay, it's an older movie. It's hilarious. It's really quite funny, and if you haven't seen it, you probably want to find it at a video store and check it out. But anyway, his psychiatrist encourages Bob, this, what would you say? He's quite OCD. He's quite needy. And his psychiatrist encourages him to take a vacation from his problems. Right? So ladies, let's take a vacation from those events, those situations, those insecurities in our lives that cause us to reroute our focus and our attention from Jesus. Use that time to get alone with him. Pour your heart out in honesty before him and allow him to heal those wounded places. Before long, you'll realize that quote, Christine Kane in your life doesn't exist anymore. Those anxious feelings of self-doubt and ugly comparative cycles don't exist anymore. This leads us to this last thing here at this point, is to tether the peace of your soul to God's expectations, not others. At the end of the day, Shiphrah and Puah had to live with themselves in the fact or the knowledge that they had brought forth life and not death. This is our calling. It's our calling to bring forth life to those that we're with, no matter who they are or what they have or have not done for our benefit. When we live under the weight of others' expectations, it creates an underlying angst inside of us that will ultimately explode and splatter devastation on every single person that we know. It's critical that we keep our eyes on Jesus and tether our peace to God's expectations. Galatians 1:10 says, "Do you think I'm trying to make people accept me? No. God is the one I'm trying to please. Am I trying to please people? If I still wanted to please people, I would ultimately not be a servant of Christ." Shiphrah and Puah had a love relationship with God that anchored them to God's expectations, not their own. Their action to disobey Pharaoh resulted from a higher, more impending caution to do the right thing, regardless of who or what was being demanded of them. You know, politically speaking, I believe these women were freedom fighters. Spiritually speaking, they were women who loved God beyond themselves, beyond the expectations of others, their own fears, or the injustices of their day. And they were unwilling to let anyone or anything stand in their way of honoring and pleasing their highest love, who is God. If God is our true love, it will be obvious in what is important to us. There's a sense of calm, there's a sense of peace, a sense of control and plan. If we're abiding in Jesus and he is abiding in us, wanting him more than anything else, we will know a mental and emotional rest in our mind and emotions when we reflect on his presence, therefore influencing the watching world around us. And I'll say, honestly, this is a challenge for me. Because in the busyness and the stress of everyday life, I have to pull away and I have to just say, okay, God, I lost it there. I really misjudged that. Or I totally let in on my kids on that one, and I need to just pull away and begin to redirect my gaze, focusing back on him, tethering the peace of my soul to what God is wanting from me. So here's a little side note. Us women, we can get busy about the tasks of our days or even the demands of our world around us, even ministry demands. We can get busy. We can get sidetracked. We forget that we have been called to a love relationship with Jesus, first and foremost, above and beyond writing or speaking or doing the chores or calling that person or praying with that person. Above and beyond all of that, I need to realize Jesus is the one that I'm ultimately called to sit at his feet. So, if we're tethering our peace and we're anchoring it to God's expectations in our lives, we are allowing him to steer the ship, which ultimately leads us into this third and final point here. Thirdly, we walk in daily obedience to the last thing that God has asked us to do. Exodus 1:17 states, "The midwives, however, feared God and did not do what the king of Egypt had told them to do. They let the boys live." I would have loved to be a fly on the wall where Shiphrah and Puah walked out of that meeting, that first original meeting with Pharaoh, and they look at each other and they're thinking, we can't do that. What is this guy, insane? We can't do that. Wouldn't you have loved to just hear what their conversation was? Well, these women knew who they ultimately needed to obey, not out of disrespect of Pharaoh's authority, but because of their fear for God. You know, our culture puffs out its chest in the face of authority and arrogantly wields itself as one who has no need for submission. Moms, it is so critical, and I want to just take a minute here to just camp on this for just a second. It's important that we teach our children to respect those who are in authority, regardless if that person deserves it or not. This goes in tandem with teaching them the fear of God, how to pray, read his word, and to love him. And out of this love comes a healthy fear, and out of a healthy fear comes a growing desire to obey. We desperately need a generation of young people who love God, honor those in authority, and have learned the blessing of obedience. We desperately need it. Deuteronomy 10:12 says this to us, "And now, Israel, what does the Lord your God ask of you? But to fear the Lord your God, to walk in obedience to him, to love him, to serve the Lord your God with all your heart and with all of your soul." Shiphrah and Puah, they learned through seasons of personal instruction and suffering the importance of obedience. Because I'll tell you, they didn't just land there that day that Pharaoh addressed them and commanded them to kill those baby boys. It had been a growing process, and that leads me to this next point. Let's be consistent. Let's be consistent in our obedience. God will whisper in our ears something that he wants us to say or something that he wants us to do. How we respond to that will encourage or discourage relationship with him. So if I hold my children to certain standards one day, but I don't the next day, that consistency and trust are broken between us. Obedience loses its effectiveness and our relationship lacks intimacy. Man, I'm telling you, consistency is tough, right? I mean, this is where the rubber hits the road. This is when in those tired, long days and your children push your buttons and you are at the end of the day and you are thinking, oh man, okay, one more act of instruction, one more act of correction, one more act of discipline. I don't know that I have it in me. I don't know that I got it in me to do this, but this is where consistency plays its critical part in our hearts and in our kids' lives. This is where we are ultimately put to the test of, okay, this is where I want intimacy. This is where I want the blessing of obedience in their lives and in my own lives way more than I want the comfort of just reclining in that chair or sitting back with those munchies or hanging out in front of that television screen. This is where the rubber hits the road. Let's be consistent. We have taught our kids in our home that obedience isn't obedience unless it's done all the way, right away, and with a happy heart. Okay, so if we're asking our kids to do that, Chris and I need to do that, right? So if God is asking us to do something, man, or if our boss or employer or anyone else is asking us to do something, I want to do it all the way. I want to do it right away, and I've got to have a happy heart about it. If not, it's really not obedience. So, boy, it's a challenge. It's a tough one. It's a tough one, but we're called to this. Okay, so the next thing, we're going to be consistent. We're also going to use wise words. In Exodus 1:18, the king calls the women in and confronts them, asking why they've let the boys live. So the king of Egypt called for the midwives. Why have you done this? Why have you allowed the boys to live? The Hebrew women are not like Egyptian women. The midwives replied, they're more vigorous, and they have their babies so quickly that we cannot get there in time. Now, I'll have to tell you, when I first initially read this, I thought that these women were being deceitful. I thought, there is no way that they could let hundreds of baby boys just live and they could just casually show up and these Israelite women had just given birth. And then the more that I studied and the more that I poured my heart over to this, I really believe that these women had probably trained up other women to step in their place so that they could give an answer that was respectful, that was honest, that was true. And who knows, maybe even God caused these Israelite women to be vigorous and just give birth like that, and these boys were delivered, and so there was no opportunity for these women to discredit their integrity. I mean, there's a lot at play here. But the way that these women presented themselves to Pharaoh, they appealed to him as an Egyptian. They said, these Israelite women, they're just not like the Egyptian women. And shouldn't that be what is said of us as Christ followers? These women who love Jesus, they're just not like the rest of the world. They just don't look like them. They don't raise their kids the same way. They don't treat their husbands the same way. Man, they are all in. They're vigorous. They're strong. They're powerful. These women used wise words. Using wise, life-giving words is critical to having our listeners' ear. So if we're going to influence our children, our neighbors, our world, we must be careful about what we say and how we say it. Not drawing attention to ourselves necessarily, but pointing people to Jesus. Matthew 10:16 says, stay alert. This is hazardous work I'm assigning you. You're going to be like sheep running through a wolf pack. So don't call attention to yourselves. Be as cunning as a snake and inoffensive as a dove. Shiphrah and Puah were just like that. They're my heroes. I love these women. I have tea with them. I hang out with their story because I need to be cheered on. In those very ordinary moments, I needed good cheering. So let's just wrap this up. God's favor and his blessing on our lives, they come as we know him through our consistent obedience and wisdom. So lastly, let's enjoy the gift. Isaiah 1:19 through 20, and this is a verse that we've encouraged our kids to memorize. It's, if you are willing and obedient, you will eat the good things of the land. But if you resist and rebel, you will be devoured by the sword, for the mouth of the Lord has spoken. There was nothing special about these ladies other than their decision to use their ordinary situation, pursue God's approval, and walk in sold-out obedience to them. And this ultimately led them to a beautiful gift A beautiful gift that we as women, we long for. We long for connection. We long for intimacy. We long for that sense of belonging and acceptance. And what did God give them? He gave them families of their own. He gave them community. He gave them connection. And a small little important detail here that is, if it were not for these women in their stand to use this opportunity in their ordinary place, if it would not have been for them, we would not have Moses. Moses was the greatest deliverer for the nation of Israel. The nation of Israel would have been obliterated. They would have been annihilated. They would have been completely destroyed. But if it wasn't for the nation, if it wasn't for these two women to take the stand that they stuck, these women who took the stand that they did, if it wasn't for them, we wouldn't have a Savior. Because it was through the line of Moses that we have Jesus. Hebrews 10:24 says this, and we prayed it at the beginning of the message. Let's discover creative ways to encourage others and to motivate them toward acts of compassion, doing beautiful works as expressions of love. So through our ordinary opportunities, seeking God's approval along with our daily obedience, our influences reach wider, they reach deeper, and they reach higher than we could have ever imagined. And I have come to love the fact that I get to have that personal presence in my kids' lives when they get home from school. I love that because I'm probably one of the greatest influences that they're going to have when it comes to knowing Jesus, learning how to pray, learning how to read his word. And so it challenges me to be the very best, the most excellent at my ordinary that I possibly can. And they will be the first ones to tell you that mom is not perfect. And they will be the first ones to tell you that I make a lot of mistakes. But I'll tell you, I love my Jesus. And I want to please him more than anything else. And so, ladies, wherever you might find yourselves this morning, whether you're feeling like you're comparing yourselves with others or you're a little discontent with where your life finds you right now, or maybe you just feel like you're just broken and you're wounded and you're hurting, or maybe you feel like you're in a great place and you are loving the season of life that God has you in right now. I want to celebrate with you, but I also want to pray with you. And so, with the God-given influence we have been given, we must use it to affect our personal worlds first. Then God will open doors for us to influence our public worlds. All right, so this morning, we're going to end in just a little different way. And so, Tom, if the worship team can go ahead and come on forward, we're going to pray together. So let's go ahead and bow our heads and close our eyes. And if there is anyone here this morning that maybe you've been hearing this message about Jesus, but you've never given your life to him, and you would like to come into a relationship with Jesus this morning, you would like to say, you know what, I have sins that haven't been forgiven. I have a life that I want to live, and I want to live it fully, and I believe that the only way that I can do that is by giving it completely over to Jesus in full surrender. And if that's you this morning, if you could just raise your hand. Everybody's eyes are closed and their heads are bowed, and so no one's looking around. And so you can do this just between you and Jesus. Would you just say, you know what, Nicki, that's me. I've never given my life, or maybe I've given my life, but I have wandered from him. And I just want to make a public commitment today to follow him. Is anyone here that could say that? If you could just raise your hand. Thank you. Thank you for that. Let's pray this together. Let's just pray. We're all just going to pray out loud because we're in this together as a family, right? We're in this as a brotherhood and a sisterhood. Jesus, we recognize that you died on the cross for my sin. I recognize that you were buried. I recognize that you rose from the dead 3 days later. And I ask that you would forgive me of my sin. I ask that you would set me on a path towards right living. I am making the choice today to turn my back on my past and to fix my eyes on you, Jesus. Help me to do that today. I choose to follow you from this point forward. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen.
Thank you for tuning in to today's message. At Crossroads, we believe that community is our calling. If you joined our online community today and are in need of prayer, you can submit your prayer requests to our website by visiting us at crossroadscn.com, hover over the About Us tab, and click Prayer Request. Each and every prayer request that is submitted is prayed over by a Crossroads staff member. We believe in a mighty God who answers our prayers, and we are overjoyed to share in your prayer requests. Once again, thank you for joining us and have a blessed week.